We took a look at how custom types allow us to create new types of values like color or user or response with a certain data type variable, but we haven't talked about type aliases yet. In Elm, type aliases don't create new types. They allow us to give nicknames to existing types to help our code be more readable, give us better error messages, and all kinds of good stuff. So let's take a look at how we can make a type alias with Elm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to user. This is the user example that we came up with in a few videos ago when we were learning about custom types, where we have a signed in and a signed out. And then in signed in, we kind of are holding on to this this value. Let's call this thing a person. What we could do with the type alias is we use the type alias keywords, and we can say, I'm going to create a nickname called person, and anytime you see person, I'm talking about this data structure. And what that means is if I import this module, and let's expose the person type, import user, now I'm going to expose everything so we can just access it there. Signed out is a variant for user, right? So signed out has type user. But when we do signed in is a function that's going to take in a person and give me back a user. So before I did this type alias thing, we were getting email string arrow user. Let's take a look, import user, exposing everything, signed in. Notice the difference here. With person, I'm able to say, hey, this huge blob of code that I'm writing, let's just call that shape a person. And that makes it easy for me to add more fields without affecting the definitions of different things. So email, name, int email name, I don't know, like maybe a manager or something. Maybe that's another person, that kind of thing. We're gonna leave that one off. So you can create a person record, and then you can use that in annotations. So you can say, get email, takes in a person and returns a string. Person, and then person.email is how we'd implement that function. So you can use these type aliases everywhere in your code. And what that means is if I delete this, it's cleaned up, it's removed name from every person across the code base. So everywhere I say person, I'm now referring to this record. The old system without type aliases is that when I want to delete the name field, I've got to remember to do it everywhere. So I'm going to kind of format this a little bit so we can see without this type alias, we kind of have to duplicate this big record over and over and over again. And so removing a field, it's not so hard with two things, but you can imagine it'd be a real pain in the butt if you had like this all over your code base and you've got, the person detail page using it and that kind of thing. So what we like to do is make type aliases to help us kind of keep track of the shapes of things and talk about them at a higher level. Another thing we can do is we can use aliases to make things more readable. So if you want, you can make type aliases ID where it's like, hey, where you see ID, that's just an int. Type alias email, that's just a string. Type alias name is also a string. We can just make as many of these nicknames as we want, and we use that alias keyword to make it so that if we want, we can say when you're signed in, rather than saying signed in string, which could be a name or an email, some folks like to make type aliases like this. So signed in takes in an email. It's pretty clear that that's what's supposed to be stored here, an email address. And that's just because we used type alias and said, hey, email is just a string under the hood. So email is not a new type. It's not anything fancy. It's just a nickname. So that's kind of type aliases at a basic level. But something weird and magical happens when you use type aliases in Elm with records. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to delete. No, I'm not going to delete anything actually. I'm going to just do this, and I'm going to just expose everything here. So when we were talking about types, let me import user and expose everything here. When we import the user module, we can say things like, status equals signed out. And because signed out is a value, this works. Status has the value signed out. I can say the status equal signed out. That'll tell me true if it is and false if it isn't. So that works fine. But it wouldn't make sense for me to say, status equals email, because email is a type. It's not a value. It doesn't hold on to like an actual number or a string or anything. It's just a shape of something. So if I hit enter, we're going to get an error message like this, where it says, hey, I can't find an email variant. It's a capital letter, so it must be like a custom type we're looking for. But the idea is email is not a value. You can't say like the value of my name is like name shape. That doesn't make sense. But something that's weird is status. We can't do it for this type alias, but what happens when we do it for this type alias? We get a function. So something that's kind of magical that happens in Elm. This is one of the few things that kind of dazzles me about the language, where it's like, that doesn't really make any sense, is that a type alias is not just a type, it's also a constructor for that type. So what we're seeing here is that person, if I just type person here, that is a function that if you give it an ID, if you give it an email, and you give it a name, it's going to return back a person. So if I say person123, if the email is ryan@elm.land, and then the name is Ryan, I get back this person record. And if I leave any of those arguments off, I get a function that's waiting for that next argument. So this is kind of like a superpower, or like a weird, interesting feature for type aliases for records, is that you get these functions for free. And they're actually incredibly useful when we get into HTTP and JSON. That's not covered in this course, but when we get into that in hopefully a future course or some future content, we'll see that this is actually really nice, specifically for like dealing with JSON coming from servers. There's a lot of good reasons why this exists, but for convenience, when you define a type alias person, it's almost as if you define something like this without having to type it. So it's almost as if you defined that person variant on the custom type person. So person's a type, and then it's also a value that if you give it an ID, you give it an email, you give it a name, we're going to get a person. So if I comment this out, and I'm going to comment this out because this isn't going to work the same. So this is what we had before. This is what I had here. Remember before when I said person, I got a function from ID, email, name to person. If I re-import this code, now that I've changed things up, it's going to look the same. So this is kind of what you get when it comes to making a type alias. At least that's the way that I think it's easiest to understand. It's as if you created a custom type that had both the type person and the value person, and you can use that to create things. The benefit to using a type alias, though, instead of this, is what we saw below, which is when it comes time to access fields. If you use the type alias, you can just access fields like it's a normal object, a normal record, everything's fine. But if you use this kind of like position-based custom type approach, it's a little bit more of a pain to get the person value back, because you have to kind of pattern match on that person. You have to say, I've got a custom type, so let me use this case expression and do this, and then I'm just interested in this email value. So like this is much harder than just saying person.email. So when you're working with records, I would definitely recommend using a type alias rather than doing this. There are benefits to this approach, but it has to do with hiding the way that things are exposed. So it's more of an advanced technique that you're probably not going to run into when you're getting started with the language. So that's it. That's type aliases. Let me think if there's anything else that I need to cover here. Yep. So you can use it as a type and a value. You can use it for things like IDs, emails, names. One more thing. You can also use the type variables we saw in a previous section. Let's just hop over here and let's just make one more type. type alias markdown. Let's say you're making a blog. Markdown, front matter. And if you've worked with Markdown before, let's just kind of open up a new thing and let's make a Markdown file. If you're making a blog, you can have this thing called front matter, you know, my blog post. And you can have like an author, Ryan, this is, you know, Markdown. You can have like, this is my post, ... You can, you know, write some markup. You could also, maybe you have a home page that's like, this is my home page. The description is learn more about me. I'm gonna set the language to Markdown here so we get that syntax highlighting. You know, learn more about me, and then this is my home page or something. If you want to represent a type alias that's like flexible, you might make something like this. You might make, you know, my front matter is this dynamic front matter variable. I'm going to rename this just for clarity, just so that you know that this is the name of the key, and then this is where we put the type. And then body is going to be like, you know, the content of that Markdown document. So if I wanted to make a blog post Markdown, what we saw from our blog post over here is that we have a title and an author field, and those are both strings. So what you can do is you can say this is Markdown, but the data type is going to be a title string and an author, which is also a string, which is different than the homepage Markdown. Page Markdown, which is going to have a description. So we've created one kind of Markdown type, this one like nickname, which is saying, hey, it's just this record where the front matter is whatever that variable is, and the body's always a string. And what that allows us to do is we can say, you know, if I want to get the description for, you know, my homepage, that can work. And it's going to be available in markdown.frontMatter, right? Because homepage Markdown is Markdown. Markdown has a front matter field, and then the data that we said, this is the data type, we can say Markdown description. This would work. But if we said, you know, we want to get the description for a blog post Markdown, we're going to get an error because blog posts, the front matter doesn't have a description field. So you can use type aliases in this way too, where you have a blog post, you know, you have a homepage Markdown. These are both nicknames for this Markdown thing. And what you're able to do is you can say, hey, I want this function to work for homepage Markdown. I want get title to work for Markdown. Or here, let's do get body actually. I want this to work for any type of Markdown. So it doesn't matter. We're going to use that lowercase type variable, and this will work too. So this means that you can use blog post Markdown, you can use homepage Markdown. It doesn't matter. As long as these are both Markdown, the value of our front matter, this function doesn't care about it. This function's flexible. So what we're able to do is, let's just import this. Import main. Oops, import main, exposing everything. And what we're going to be able to do is say, you know, get body. And then let's actually make our blog post Markdown. Blog post Markdown has the type blog post Markdown. That's going to equal front matter. And so let's take a look at what our blog post had. We've got this. The title is that, and the author is this, right? Author is me. And then the body is what we saw here. So it was like, this is my post. It had 2 new lines, and then it had ... So I've got this variable now, blog post Markdown, and I can access all kinds of stuff on there. So blog post Markdown has a body field that gives you that string back. It has a front matter field, and that's going to give me access to the author and the title, that kind of thing. And we could do the exact same thing with the home page. So I'm going to switch over here, and I'm going to say homepage markdown is going to be homepage markdown. And again, I'm getting this type from the one we declared here, where it's a markdown that holds on to this information. So if we go over here, we can do the kind of a similar thing where we go up. And I'm just going to save us some time by reusing a little bit of the code that we typed. So this is just homepage. And then here, we don't have an author, we have a description. So it's going to be learn more about me. And then the body, again, is going to be what we saw before. This is my homepage, though. New line, dot, dot, dot. So this would represent the markdown that, maybe we asked the server, we read it from the disk, and we got this variable somehow. But what's cool about that is if I want to call getBody, I can call that on either of these variables that I made. So that blog post markdown variable I made, you can call getBody on that because it is flexible. It works for anything that is markdown. So homepage markdown it works for, blog post markdown it works for. So we can see that works for both. Works great. Looks like I forgot the hash when I was translating it. But get description, for example, that won't work on the blog post. And that is because we said the blog post markdown doesn't have this description field. So get description needs that description field, and it's like, did you mean author or something? Because it doesn't quite add up. But yeah, so this doesn't work for a blog post, but it would work for any homepage markdown. So we can use types to create functions and annotate them here and make things a little bit more constrained. So when we want to be flexible, we can use that flexible variable. And when we want to be very specific and we want to say, hey, this only works on this specific type of markdown that has a title and it has a description, as opposed to any type of markdown, for example, things like this that don't have descriptions. So that's how we can use type aliases, I guess. And that summarizes kind of the intro to type section. Next, we're going to dive into data structures. We've talked about strings, we've talked about lists and things like that, but there's some more exciting ones, and I really want to dive in deep so that you can understand how to work with all sorts of different data that you might have in your programs. So I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.